Ladies and gentlemen,
today's news talk.
News and information.
Today's news talk. TNT.
You can find him over at climatedepot.com or at Climate Depot on Twitter. I would encourage following his account. It's a good one. Mark Morano is with us. Now, Mark, before you got here, I was talking about the carbon footprint of warfare, which just seems to keep going. It's on the rise. No end in sight whatsoever at Ukraine and Russia. In fact, the White House has just pledged, hey, we're going to give you whatever we want. Let's just do the free checks. It keeps coming. Middle East keeps going. But what is the carbon footprint? Because listen, I know that I'm bad. I shouldn't be driving a gas vehicle, let alone 2 gas vehicles. I should probably not be in a 3-bedroom home. I'm really greedy that way. Got a lot of things plugged in. I mean, what am I, compared to say, like, I don't know, one ICBM that wipes out a small village? I mean, where are we?
Yeah, the Pentagon and the military-industrial complex carbon footprint is bigger than anything else you can imagine. It is the number one carbon footprint. And it is ironic, as you say, that these people from Joe Biden to Kamala Harris who want these endless wars that they get us involved in and nonstop, never once consider the carbon footprint. Now, I shouldn't say never once necessarily, because you have the head of the Navy who is now trying to go solar powered and wind, having ships. We have even the governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, talking about having submarines and ships powered by algae to reduce their carbon footprint. But that's all window dressing. It's not, you can actually run a military on green energy. So we know that there are calls for solutions to climate, assuming we ever face a climate crisis, which we don't, never include the military. And that's very telling. By the way, another big industry people don't realize is the carbon footprint of Hollywood, another industry that never gets called to task for their carbon footprint. But no, you can't have a plastic straw or use plastic bags at the grocery store. You can't drive a gas-powered cars, and you have to cut down on meat and eat lab-grown meat or insects. But everything else can go on as normal, because that's what the global elites want us to do.
And by the way, when you look at Hollyweird, you have sets that are never going to be used again, that are destroyed immediately. Oh, yeah. When you have real world special effects, you are using low level explosives. And we're not talking about the type that would carve out a piece of land and actually be useful. They're one-time use. But again, none of that is ever discussed because it's so against the narrative. But yet, Hollyweird is where it is pushed the most. I would also say that arena has been pushed into sports and this influencer culture as well. So what is the future of the green movement? How are they going to sell this on the American and global populace?
Great question. Just one thing, you mentioned sports. There are these college football teams at some of the most liberal universities that brag about their travel schedules, and even some of them even international, without a care in the world when it comes to sports. Again, the whole thing is a fraud. They're going after you and me and the common everyday person. That's who they want to punish. The future of this agenda is sort of the future of what happened to defund the police. For decades, small chattering, the activists, community activists, we're talking like AOC, we don't need to fund the police because, the middle class neighborhoods don't need it. We don't need police anymore. They're just a problem. They violate civil rights. George Floyd happened, and they got to put their actual defund the police into action. And we saw with horror every major U.S. city topple under to crime, violence, riots as police departments were denutted and defunded. Within a year and a half, Joe Biden is announcing it's time to refund the police. All these mayors have all had to back away. Everyone now, even the liberals, acknowledge it was a disastrous experiment. The green energy experiment has been going on for decades. Remember, Arnold Schwarzenegger passed the California climate bill. I think it was 2005 or 6. I think it was 2005. And he was heralded as a climate hero. Nothing he did back then had any impact back then. He was just making pledges for the future. Well, what's happened? The future is now. We're seeing the climate agenda in real time with the collapse of global agriculture, the attempts to collapse global agriculture, coming after freedom of movement, transportation, gas-powered cars, restrictions on airlines, France banning flights at 2.5 hours or less, CNN calling for carbon passports, and of course, just the complete collapse of green energy mythology. You have now liberals, and I know because I was out on a fisherman's boat last summer in Rhode Island off of Cape Cod, protesting these offshore wind. They don't produce energy. They're decimating marine mammals and whales. They're affecting the fishermen, and they're as tall as the Eiffel Tower. The blades go 200 miles. Now they're breaking off, and at exclusive Tony beaches of the wealthy, you're having shards of plexiglass wash up on the shore. It's a disaster of epic proportions, and people realize that about EVs, which take 500,000 pounds of materials to make one Tesla-sized EV battery. None of it is green. None of it makes any sense. None of it can replace fossil fuels or oil or gas. It's all a sham, and I think the public is being red-pilled, and not only that, but politicians won't be able to push it for much longer. In Europe, they had a big reckoning at the polls in the EU back in June. I was in Vienna, Austria, right after that happened. Huge earthquakes are happening. There's no there. This is essentially the old Marxism, Lysenkoism under Soviet rule, China rule, where they just push an ideology till they drain it, and people realize it's a complete fraud, because there's a lot of true believers, and even them have to admit. And so what's happening now is you have Kamala Harris reversing herself on every key thing. She's now saying she doesn't support EV mandates. She doesn't support a ban on fracking. She won't even talk about climate. Shh. The new word is mum is the word on climate.
See, you're more optimistic than I am. I think as soon as they steal the election and pop her back in, it's
Absolutely.
the same mantra. I think even if Trump gets in, the opposition goes even harder. You know, you just mentioned the fact, and I did too before you got here, people don't talk about the carbon footprint of what goes into one of those lithium batteries, let alone the actual human impact of the people working in the lithium mines. The same thing with the building of these large-scale wind turbines, whether they be in the ocean or otherwise. Do they ever produce the amount of energy that is put into them? Well, that's highly debatable if they do, or if it's worth it with all the transport. But then, you know, you also discuss the military. And let me say this. Obviously, the military has certain technologies they have not shared with the public. When you look at a submarine that is a nuclear submarine, even Trump alluded to the fact that a very small part of that is running this entire ship, and it's incredible. Why aren't we utilizing that type of energy? If you look at, you know, 4th, 5th generation nuclear, it is much cleaner than it used to be. If it can power a military submarine, it seems like something you'd want to utilize if you were trying to empower humanity and raise the standard of living, rather than control humanity and restrict that standard.
Yeah, and I worked in the Senate Environment Public Works Committee back during George W. Bush and Obama's presidency. Nuclear is just absolutely despised by the climate and environmental activists, and even RFK Jr. to this day opposes nuclear energy. It makes no sense. France, even with Macron and all their wokeness and silliness, they are, I think, like 70 to 60 some percent running on nuclear. A very, if you care about it, low emitting country because of that. The thing with nuclear, if you really want to blame someone, blame Jane Fonda. It was her film, The China Syndrome, 1979, which turned the public against it in Hollywood with all the scares about nuclear energy, nuclear fallout. And of course, the Chernobyl didn't help, but Chernobyl was a Soviet disaster that had nothing to do with nuclear engineering, nuclear technology. That was just part of the collapse of the Soviet Union. But people, again, HBO just did a documentary scaring the hell out of people about Chernobyl and what that would mean if you had nuclear. So that's
Mark, let me stop you. Let me stop you really quick. Just because you brought up Chernobyl, you know, this is a story that's out there this week. You're not going to see it in the headlines, kind of been buried. But our testing in New Mexico via our nuclear programs and God knows what else, guess what, folks? The radiation levels in those areas, they've been tested. There's been a guy now doing it for years, as high as Chernobyl is. There are no restrictions. You can walk around these areas. So again, there's a lot of hype behind the narratives of fear surrounding this type of energy that's being utilized by our military and beyond. We got to take a break for the headlines. When we come back, I also want to posit something to you that maybe we haven't talked about, and that's artificial intelligence in this green technology movement, because that's also not being discussed, and AI is going to sap up a ton of power. We're going to come back, we're going to discuss that and much more. It's TNT after this.
Now, TNT Radio News.
You are completely obsessed with
breaking news.
Matt Boyland here with your TNT headlines. Donald Trump has blamed US President Joe Biden and his VP Kamala Harris for last month's failed assassination attempt, accusing the Democratic duo of making it difficult for the Secret Service to protect him.
They weren't too interested in my health and safety.
4 days after he was arrested in France, Telegram's CEO has been released on a $5.5 million bond, and Poland's announced it has no weapons left to send to Ukraine.
For a complete list of shows and our schedule offered on TNT, simply visit our website at tnt.news, keeping you in the loop on today's news talk, TNT.
We are back with Mark Morano. And Mark, before the break, I alluded to AI. And here's something, again, it's conflicting narratives. It's a paradox in the post-truth world. We're talking about energy conservation. We're talking about green energy. Yet, when you look at even a technology like the blockchain, that, you know, if people are in the know and they understand how Bitcoin is mined, it is done so through a process of massive amounts of energy, usually through different video cards, even on a commercial level. Now, I have these video cards, and over the years, my editing's gotten better, but you know what? The battery supply has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger just with these small cards. Now, we're living in the era of AI. NVIDIA stock through the roof. They obviously have more than just the commercial cards. In fact, out of South Korea, where they're based, they have these new machines that are digital twinning factories and beyond with their AI. The amount of energy that this is taking is absolutely massive. Now, we're supposed to be leading in AI and automation and the replacement of all these things. Where's the energy going to come from, Mark?
This is amazing because AI has a lot of problems. Now, normally, it's new technology. It's great. Who's going to control that new technology? Is it going to be Bill Gates, China, the World Economic Forum? So there's all those. Let's set that aside. Where is this energy coming from? Let me read you this headline. Washington Post. This is from like 3 months ago. Washington Post admits energy reality. Explosive demand. America is running out of power. U.S. power grid being pushed to the brink. Utilities can't keep up because they're threatens to stifle the energy, the cleaner energy. And it's all about AI. AI is going to have the biggest power demand on our electrical grid. You can't even imagine. AI has forced, this is the actual quote, BlackRock's Larry Fink to admit green energy is a total fraud. This is a quote, I believe, from January of 2024, this year at a WEF meeting. Larry Fink said, quote, by 2030, data centers will need 30 gigawatts. Where's that power going to come from? To power the data companies, you can't have intermittent power like wind and solar. Bingo. We are looking at more oil, more gas, and more coal if they truly want to have this AI and make us all useless eaters, and they want to control AI. So the only good, the way I see it currently, AI's greatest benefit is exposing the fraud that green energy can power our economy. It can't, and now even BlackRock is forced to admit that.
Well, that's what I'm hoping, because the narrative certainly isn't going to highlight that fact, right? You're still going to be force-fed this idea that you should be not eating enough, all this meat, that you should be, intermittently taking cold showers, this lunacy that you're the bad guy. They're not going to stop powering this. I want people to realize that, because just like we're not stopping with the smart bombs and the drone technology and the automation. I mean, look at the stock market right now, folks. NVIDIA's up. Lockheed Martin's doing great. Raytheon, no problem. This is an extension of warfare, whether you like it or not, and it is viewed that way from both sides of the coin, whether it's Republican or Democrat. So somehow, some way, they will find the power to drive their AI. There is no doubt about that to me, Mark. And if that's at the expense of their citizenry, if that is at the expense, again, of our standard of living, I think that's 100%. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. They're not going to give up on AI, but I think they're just going to. Reality has to intercede at some point, and resistance of the public. Europeans are now becoming wise to this in their voting booth. The farmers spraying manure, this whole net zero renewable energy. It's just not. They can't sell it much longer. The more they try it, the more it fails. Look at Sri Lanka. They went all in on the net zero agriculture, and the peasants overran the presidential palace. So in a way, it's almost like you want them to succeed, just like they succeeded in defunding the police, because that's the quickest way to end this, possibly. Now, I just want to clear something up. I wasn't optimistic that the green agenda is dying. I was just telling you that people are realizing it, but when people realize it, they're going to double down with more totalitarianism. Give you a quick example. Inflation Reduction Act was only passed a few $100 billion. That's only. Now, the latest estimates are one congressionally authorized bill, which Kamala Harris did the tie-breaking vote, which is essentially the funding arm of the Green New Deal, the Inflation Reduction Act, is now in the trillions of dollars, at least 1.2 trillion and climbing. So Congress authorizes the spending bill, and the Biden administration and the deep state and the bureaucracy just going to continue to spend trillions in perpetuity in the future because they have the bill passed. No longer is Congress control the purse strings. So what's going to happen is it's going to be forced upon us. They want chaos. That's their goal. As Vladimir Lenin in 1917, Tsarist Russia said, the slogan was the worse, the better when he was fighting Tsarist Russia, because the more chaos you can create, the more collapse, disruption, the better it is for totalitarians to seize control. Think of COVID, how the totalitarians seized control for years. You couldn't go to church, weddings, funerals, and stay-at-home orders, schools closed, etc. Frightening stuff. And that's what they want. They want that chaos. They will use force to make us comply, or they're going to try.
Well, I think that's the problem, right? Because look, they always rebrand things. You just mentioned the infrastructure bill. That was originally known as the Build Back Better plan. You had Kamala Harris up there saying that her and Joe came up with it together. Meanwhile, the previous 18 months, you had just seen a mantra of all these individuals from Western countries using the same exact terminology. I would argue that Cuomo was actually the first one to use it in the States. It was April, I think, 24th or the 14th at one of his press conferences. Not only named it, he was giving those big presentations, had Build Back Better up there, and then mentioned 9/11. And he's like, before 9/11, if they told you were going to have to take your shoes off at the airport, you would have said hell no, and there's no way they're doing that. And invoking what they had planned. They still got to pass through. Enough Americans were like, build back better. Whoa. We don't want that. Then narrowly, like you said, somehow, some way, they get it passed down by a nut's hair of Kamala Harris as the vice president, as the one vote in the Senate. So they put on a nice flashy show with the uniparty. I'm mad about it. I think it's great. There's a few genuine people in there. Mike Lee, maybe, Rand Paul, maybe, but most of them playing the game. And the agenda keeps moving damn forward. Got about a minute left in the segment, Mark. How the hell do we put the brakes on it and kick stomp it back?
Well, I think first of all, the election has consequences. So if Donald Trump wins, the best scenario here is he has to do what he was unwilling to do the first term. And that is go after, first off, the heart of the United Nations control. And last time, all he did was withdraw from the treaty. This time, withdraw from the UN Paris Agreement. This time, he needs to actually withdraw from the entire UN Sustainable Development Framework that was originally signed by George H.W. Bush, a Republican in '92. We need to get out of that process, make it very difficult to get back in. And he needs people at the EPA that are going to reframe this whole debate and go after all these regulations, the Department of Energy. And you've got to find a way to use the bully pulpit to just end this, because it's got to be mass resistance to this interference in our economy and just stranglehold of our energy. It's simple: collapse of energy, food, transportation. That should be the three key environmental goals that they're fighting, and they should use that in every way possible. They have to stop Bill Gates from buying farmland, somehow regulations, stop China, stop Bezos. Jeff Bezos is close behind. They have to come up with a way not to keep approving, rubber stamping Bill Gates and his lab grown meat. And they're also approving insect eating. It's fine if people want to eat that, but they don't. The idea is they want to force us to eat it. And I guess that ultimately comes down to financial policy as well, because you can't have the printing of money and the massive debt and deficits. And Donald Trump's kind of weak on those issues, I think, because he's a big spender like a lot of the other Republicans and Democrats before him.
Well, they're already sneaking the bugs in the food as fillers. We'll leave that for another day. Mark, thank you so much for joining us. Hey, everybody, Jason Bermas here. And if you enjoyed that segment, I want to let you know that I am live 5 days a week over at TNT.news. And if you go there, you can also interact in the chat. It is 3 to 5 Eastern time. We are global, baby. So again, if you dug that segment, please come check me out every Monday through Friday at TNT.news.